support in any way I can to Corpus and the great work. Thank you, Jerry, for your hospitality. Whenever I'm in front of a microphone like this, I always think of this homie I know named Lewis, and he kind of worked at Homeboy for like 10 years, and he was a heroin addict, been in prison, he was a gangbanger, he was a knucklehead, but he was running the place for like 10 years. And when I couldn't get to a talk, I would send him, and he liked speaking. And we went out to dinner once, just the two of us, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you've got to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That's some good advice there. So, I always think that any kind of gathering like this, where we're kind of wanting to connect ourselves to a larger love, it's a little bit like what Martin Luther King says about church. It's not the place you come to, it's the place you go from. And so all of us will eventually, tonight, go from this place. And we go from this place to do something very specific. And that is to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. We go from this place to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You will go from here in your support of Corpus in dismantling the barriers that exclude. And to that end, we all want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which were only 4 things, which is lucky for us. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. So we go from here to create a community of cherished belonging. And we go to the margins to do that, which is what you're here for, which is to be giving access and to be more inclusive. And you go to the margins and you stand there because that's the only way they'll ever get erased, is if you stand out at them. And you go from here and you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you stand with those whose dignity has been denied. And you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while, you get this amazing privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And that's God's dream come true, that we create a place of connection where there is no us and them. Where there is this sense that there's this great divide that keeps us from each other. And Jesus says that you may be one, which is the articulation of what God hopes will happen. And you go from here and you stand at the margins and you brace yourselves a little bit, because everybody knows that folks will accuse you of wasting your time at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." What you give access to here at Corpus is you allow and help facilitate voices to be heard, perhaps for the first time. Well, none of that makes any sense at all were it not for how hugely consequential it is our notion of God might be. And we're trying to hope for a God that's spacious and expansive. St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about the God who's always greater. And sometimes we're stuck with a puny notion. Now, Meister Eckhart talks about, he says, it is a lie any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. We want to find the spacious God so that we can be in the world who God is. A homie finished an email to me just 4 days ago where he ends the message by saying, today I will surrender into the arms of God, and then I will choose to be those arms, which I thought was pretty profound. I had a spiritual director many years ago who said, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a Jesuit. But of course he's right, because Richard Rohr says, of course we're created in the image and likeness of God, but our image of God creates us. So if you have a tiny one, then you're kind of doomed to be tiny in the world. But if your God is spacious and large, then you can choose to be those arms in the world. I was saying Mass at a San Fernando Juvenile Hall with the detention facility. There were about 300 gang members in this gym, and I had my Alban and my stole, and I was sitting on a chair on kind of a raised platform like this, and at the podium, the kids would come up, the homies from the gang members, they were all gang members, and they'd come up and do the readings, and they had these sheets that had the readings in English and in Spanish, and when you preside, you kind of go, I'm just going to listen to the word proclaim. I'm not going to read along. So I kind of rested the sheet on my lap and I closed my eyes. The first guy got up to the Old Testament reading. Second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And I don't know what it was. There was a kind of an overabundance of confidence in his voice. And he gets up and he says, the Lord is exhausted. And I said, what the hell? It was the Lord is exalted. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because every one of us, if we were God, of course we would want to be exalted. It's kind of the human projection. But boy, the exhausted God, wow. You can connect to it. You had the grandkids over. And they said, how was your weekend? Oh my God, I pooped. I had the grandkids. But it's a good tired. You know what it means. You know what it means. It's the very generosity of God that it's not about me, it's about you. The exhausted God. It's not bad. At Homeboy Industries, we kind of want to be in the world who God is as much as we can. We want to greet the 10,000 gang members who walk through our doors every year. There are 120,000 in LA County, 1,100 gangs. And they're all walking through the doors, and they're barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. All of them come with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So we want to greet people. We want to create a place that's safe, where they can feel seen, and then they can feel cherished. The homies who have spent 20, 25, 30 years in prison come out, and they always say to me the same thing. They go, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. If it's true, as I believe it is, that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. Systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And I think that's kind of how it works. At Homeboy, we're allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. mainly because our exhausted God never does this with us. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth. We tell them that they're exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then you watch them become that truth. You watch them inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it, and no four prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it really is huge. But you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. Parentheses. I'm a Jesuit, and today, exactly on this day, February 27th, 1540, St. Ignatius of Loyola wrote this one word in his spiritual journal. Now, I should say that at Homeboy we have 3 Jesuits there, but the homies don't know what a Jesuit is, And there's myself, and Homeboy was founded 37 years ago when I was pastor in Fort Parish and in the projects. And over the course of this time, I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. And I buried my 263rd about 3 months ago. Not all from that parish, but I get asked to do this because I know a lot of gang members. So we started a school and we started a jobs program, and we have 14 social enterprises now. And every gang member in LA County knows where we are, and we hope they'll walk through the doors. But the homies don't know what a Jesuit is, even though there are 3 of us who work there. And so one day I was sitting in my office, and I was behind my desk. I was talking to 2 gang members, homies, and we have 800 employees. And I can look out through my glass enclosed office. I can see everybody in the reception area, people coming in. And we have about 8 tour groups a day, people from all over the world. And so I'm sitting there talking to these 2 homies, and a big tour group just plants itself right in front of my glass enclosed office, like 20 people. And it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat. And I wave faintly. And the guy giving the tour is a guy named Osvaldo, and he is what the homies call, he has a loud ass voice, So he's standing there and he says, "This is Father Greg Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest." So from his curse, I kind of do some of my more impressive moves. Let me get back to February 27th, 1540, when Ignatius of Loyola enters this one word in his spiritual journal, in his diary, and he proceeds to use it a lot for the remaining 12 years of his life until he died. And before he died, he went back and he circled the word for all the times he had used it. And I know Spanish, but I didn't know this word. And the word is acatamiento. Acatamiento. And it comes from a word acatar, which means to look at something with attention. And though certainly it was born of a mystical singular moment between Ignatius and his God, he wanted it to become something different, like a stance at the margins, like a disposition. So if this dinner tonight is the place you've come to, when you go from here, how do we stand at the margins? What's our disposition? And the word acatamiento gets translated as affectionate awe, which reminds me of, in the Acts of the Apostles, it has this one line that says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Tratamiento. So a number of years ago, I was invited to speak in Richmond, Virginia, to 600 social workers, and it's what we used to call in those days a gang in service. And so they'd have keynote speeches, and they'd have workshops and breakout sessions, and 600 social workers would commandeer a hotel ballroom, and they'd sign in and get credits to be there from 9 to 5. And I've done a lot of these where you talk about, kind of what's the undergirding profiles and cause, why would a kid join a gang, about how it is a lethal absence of hope, and how it is about trauma and kids being unable to transform their pain so they continue to transmit it. And it's about delivering mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. So I've done a lot of these things, and I figured I'd do a keynote, and I said yes, so I bought my plane ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the letter inviting me, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all the day. And also, as the homies would say, I said, oh hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I call in 2 trainees, and so all the homies there, some 500 who are trainees, which is they're in an 18-month training program. They work in our bakery, our cafe, all our businesses, and they also heal. They work on themselves. So I call in 2, Andre, an African-American gang member, and Jose, and they were enemies. And I sat them down, and they were in their 9th month with us in their 18-month program. And I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long ass day. But I never heard their stories. Jose gets up first. I think he was about 25 years old at the time. Gang member, shot caller, been to prison, tattooed. At that juncture, we have a lot of departments, legal and mental health, and he became a very valued member of our substance use disorder team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only had he a gang member and on the streets and in prison, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And then he says, it sounds way worse in Spanish. I've never seen this happen. It's like whiplash. We went from gasp to laugh. But then he continued. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door. Guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there. For 90 days, until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine, and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Acatamiento. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. Let me just close with this. You know, it occurs sometimes, mainly in jiu-jitsu universities, to force their students to read my books against their will. But Gonzaga University in Spokane had forced the incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart, and they said, could you come and could you bring 2 homies with you? And I said, sure. And I always pick homies generally in the same way. I always pick enemies, rivals, because everybody at Homeboy has multiple rivals, guys they used to shoot at. I always pick rivals just to force them to share a hotel room, you know, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill to be able to watch gang members panic in the sky. I remember once I was at LA International Airport, and there were 2 older homies who were flying in, and one of them said, hey, gee, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked 2 homies, Larry, an African-American gang member, and Mario. And I just came back from Philadelphia, I just came back from Baltimore and Minneapolis, and so I'm used to homies being terrified because it's their first time. But nothing prepared me for this guy Mario, who was absolutely petrified. In fact, he was hyperventilating, which I had never actually witnessed in a person. You know, we hadn't even boarded the plane. And so we went to Burbank Airport, which is the smallest airport, but it's big planes, Southwest Airlines, and you don't go through that hermetically sealed chute to board the plane. You walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the steps in the front of the plane. Big feature at Burbank, steps that go to the back of the plane. And I'm sitting there with Mario, and Larry is exploring the airport, and it's early morning, first flight of the day, and I see our flight crew arrives, and there are 2 female flight attendants. Both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps to board the plane. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilot. Now, perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So, I should tell you that Mario is the most tattooed person who's ever worked at Homeboy, and trust me, that's saying a lot. He's all sleeved out. to his fingertips. Neck blackened with the name of his gang. Head shaved, covered with tattoos. Forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end. So that, I suppose, when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt for anyone. And I'd never been in public with him, so I think, well, let me walk him through the airport to calm him down, you know, and I was startled, you know, people are going, oh my God, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and I go, wow. Because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and walk up to anybody and just say, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here, they would wait exactly a beat, and then they'd say, Mario. Yeah, Mario. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. He's proof that the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. So we get to Gonzaga, big talk, Tuesday night, 1,000 people, but what they don't tell you is they'd like you to visit 93 classrooms before you get to the big talk. So I said, you guys get up there, you talk. I'm gonna sit in the back of the room. So they got up and they were really good, and they, stories of terror and torture and violence, abuse of every imaginable kind. Honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So we get to the big event, 1,000 people. I coaxed them to get up and do what they did in the classrooms, you know, give a thumbnail of their stories. Then I got up and I did my thing, and then I invited them to come up and stand on either side for a Q&A. And yes, ma'am, and a woman stands, and she goes, yeah, I got a question, it's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario is this tall, skinny, drink water, and he stands in front of the microphone, he clutches it intensely. He's just terrified, he says, yes. And the woman says, well, Mario, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone with even greater intensity, and he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's gonna say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone, closed-eyed, refuge, clutching the microphone with great intensity, and I know he's now losing the battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman who asked the question, it's her turn to cry now, and she stands and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand. They will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had decided to return him to himself. And let there be no doubt that everybody standing and clapping had also been returned to themselves. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. And so this evening is, and this dinner is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody's standing outside of it. You go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You go from here to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. And my sense already of every single one here is that you gave up a long time ago caring if anyone accuses you of wasting your time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. God bless you and thank you for supporting Corpus.